Еще пока тепло, это после мороз, это вообще.
Ну вот мороза я не представляю.
Ziņā bija redzams, ka man tas krēsls bija saplīsis, tad atnāca jauna ģimene un atkal stundu šuva.
В Латвии за год на 100 тысяч больше безработных.
Я думаю, реально больше намного. Намного
это
больше.
те, кто зарегистрирован на 100.
Так зарегистрированы, понимаешь, люди стоят на биржу, приходят на биржу, в течение там 9 месяцев или меньше получают пособие. Но получают пособие в зависимости от стажа. То есть вот если я уйду на биржу, я получу пособие 9 месяцев. А потом, какой смысл ходить, отмечаться, быть привязанным к этой бирже? Они ничем никто не помогает.
Так они зарегистрировать не успевают. По 1000 безработных в день, и надо записываться, чтобы стать безработным.
Да, и в 6 часов очереди идут на биржу. Это я тоже слышала. И вот эти где-то около 200 тысяч, я считаю, что раза в 3 у нас больше реально. Смотри, Виктор, пожалуйста. Он же не работает уже, он ходил на биржу. Сколько лет прошло? Наверное, год, 1,5, 2, сколько он без работы. А что ходить? Что, работу предложат? Смысл хождения на биржу? А уехала сколько?
Смотри, 100 тысяч как минимум сейчас уехала.
Я думаю, что больше. Посмотри, молодежь вся. Возьми вот любую семью, и хотя бы один человек уехал за границу. И те, кто уехал, ну я не знаю, маловероятно, что кто-то вернется. Как в том анекдоте. Последние улетающие из Рижского аэропорта, не забудьте выключить свет. Не, ну вообще это грустно.
Why should we believe that capitalism as such would get us somehow out of this mess?
Well, capitalism could get us out of it, but capitalism is not being allowed to work right now. Had capitalism been allowed to work, we wouldn't be in this situation now. If back in 1994 or 1998 people had been allowed to collapse, we wouldn't have had the prosperity we had in the early part of this decade. On the other hand, we wouldn't have the collapse that we have now. We had an artificial prosperity. Now we're having an artificial decline, if you will. That's government interference. That's not capitalism that caused that. It's the governments that didn't let capitalism work the way it should. But let's look. I'm defending capitalism, but don't think that I don't know that capitalism has serious flaws and serious problems. But had the government stayed out of the way, the market, we would all be in better shape right now.
Can capitalism pull us out of this crisis?
Not the current capitalism that we live within. We live within a form of capitalism which is very different from that which I grew up in, for example, of the 1950s and the 1960s. We live in a form of capitalism which is dominated by finance capitalism, which has liberated itself from regulation and which does not make its money, if you like, from engaging in productive activity, but makes its money from money. And what happened in the 1930s was that we had a form of globalization that we have today. And what John Maynard Keynes and other brilliant economists did, as well as President Roosevelt, was to begin to regulate that capitalism, regulate finance capitalism above all else, and argue that money is different from, from goods and services, and therefore money must be regulated because it's a different animal from the business of trade from the business of trade in goods and services.
In what way is it a different animal?
Well, money is not something which grows on trees. It's not something which you dig out from the ground. Money is a human construct which enables us to exchange goods and services. And actually, it comes out of the blue sky. When people asked Ben Bernanke in the spring of this year, Ben Bernanke gave an interview to CBS television. And he was asked by the interviewer, where did you find $160 billion to bail out AIG? And did you raise it from taxes, said the interviewer. And Mr. Bernanke said, no. He said, we found the money in exactly the same way as your commercial bank finds the money. We have a computer, and we entered a number into the computer, and we charged it to AIG's account. That's how we found $160 billion to bail out AIG. And Mr. Bernanke is absolutely right. That is how credit is created, and that is how money is created in the first instance in our banking system. But because it is created so easily and so simply, that is why it has to be regulated. When you grow tomatoes, you have to dig the soil, you have to wait for the sun to shine and the rain to fall, you have to employ labor to harvest the tomatoes, and then you have to take them to market. You don't have to do that with money. You enter a number into a computer and you charge it to an account. For that reason, money must be treated differently from tomatoes.
Are we all living in Dubai without knowing it?
Well, I think that in the Western world, in the US, when 1929 occurred, I mean, the crisis after 29 to 33, debt had expanded very rapidly between 1921 and 29, and in 29, debt to GDP was 186%. And then in the 30s and 40s, we had a period of deleveraging. By the way, when the US went into World War II and war expenditures exploded, the debt to GDP was just 140%. Then we had a steady debt to GDP at about 140% until 1980, and since then we've gone officially to 375% debt to GDP in the US. In other words, from 140 to 375. And in the last 7 years, 2000 to 2007, total credit in the US expanded by $21.3 trillion, and the GDP increased by $4.2 trillion. In other words, to generate $1 of additional growth, you needed $5 of credit. And that is, of course, not sustainable in the long run. Now, the other thing that is the kind of thing that will be a disaster, not just for the US, but for Western Europe, is the unfunded pension fund liabilities and contingent liabilities arising from Medicare and Medicaid and now Obama's new health care program. That is another probably $59 to $110 trillion. Depends how they calculate it. But basically, that is another times as much debt as we have already officially. I tell you, in my opinion, the US has no other way but to print money. The whole system is bankrupt. They have to print money, and they'll print it. And so I take the view, eventually we'll have hyperinflation.
And until then we're dancing on the volcano, actually.
Yes, I mean, they can muddle through for a while. But in my opinion, the high inflation rates could actually come sooner than people realize. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if in 5 years' time we're in quite a big mess.
Will 2010 be a year of bending or breaking? What would be your answer?
I would say that it's probably a year of bending, but not breaking. I don't personally see the recovery that everyone is so confident of, and that the stock markets seem to believe is there. And I think that the central banks of Britain and the United States and in Europe will keep the fiscal stimulus going and liquidity provided to the system, and will keep interest rates very low, and that will help to manage the situation for a little while longer while building up another bubble for the longer term. So I think probably the bursting of another bubble doesn't take place this year, but in 2 or 3 or even 5 years' time.
You, like everybody else, is going to look for the sign when the thing is, when the next crisis is on our doorstep. What do these signs look like?
Well, I want to remind you that basically, if you ask me, this is all part of a continuum. Yes, the stock market went up. The stock market, the American stock market is around 10,000 right now on the Dow Jones average. It could go to 30,000 if they continue to print money. But you're going to be you who think you've made money because you think the Dow Jones has tripled, but it's tripled in worthless paper. So we're not going to be better off, and that's part of what's happening now. The stock market has gone up, but the value of the money is deteriorating. Look at what's happened to the price of gold or silver or some of the commodities. They've been very strong because people know that the money is becoming less, the paper money is becoming less and less valuable. So you may think that if the stock market goes to 20,000 or 30,000, you're better off. But you're not. The stock market's up a lot, 50%, as you point out. Well, employment's up. Bankruptcies continue. Bankruptcies continue to increase in the United States. So people are not better off. The stock market's better off. Stockbrokers are better off because they got all the money. And that's not a good system. That's socialism. Socialism for the rich. That's welfare for the rich.